G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Those of you familiar with the channel will probably recollect that I've been doing a bit of a woodwork project, and I've been using really cheap throwaway scrap pine in the project, which scrubs up to look something more or less like this. And if you put ester polar oil on that, you're going to wind up with the IKEA look. And I was trying to avoid that. So for the first time, I got into the idea of staining cheap timber to try and make it look different. So we've got walnut stain, and we've got what they call Danish oil. And the thing about this stain business is it soaks into the wood, and the amount that soaks into the wood depends on how porous the wood is. So if you've got some softwood and some dense hardwood side by side, then the dense hardwood won't take up much grain, and the light soft porous wood will take up a lot of grain. So remembering that the dark rings in the growth rings of wood, the darkness, that's the dense wood. It grew there in the winter time when the temperature was low and the metabolic rate was low, so it's denser, it's harder, it grows slower, therefore it is more dense. The light coloured stuff grew faster in the summer when it was warm. So paradoxically, the stain is going to turn the light stuff darker than the dark stuff, because not so much stain is going to soak into the currently dark rings in the wood. A phenomenon shown pretty well by this test block. Now that was the actual effect that I hope to use on the working piece. This is unmasked, but it is stained. You can see it's been filled with iron filing contaminated wood flour into some saw cuts, which were in the piece of scrap wood when I first got it. And this is the unstained surface. And that view probably shows it pretty well too. Particularly that edge alignment there. So anyway, I learnt as much as I could on these test pieces. So that's the the unstained oiled finish on the radiata pine. And then we come down here and that is a stained version of that. And if we turn that around, let's stand there. Damn, it probably doesn't want to stand there. But anyway, that's the masked oiled version. And as promised, you can see the knot hole running through the workpiece, differentially soaking up the stain and showing off the grain differentially depending on the density. So it's not quite like an inlay of lighter coloured wood, but it's pretty good, you know, when you consider the shitty looking old piece of wood that it came out of, I reckon. Anyway, now that whole relative density thing, it doesn't really matter when you got two pieces of timber joining off the same bit of wood, but you get some dramatic colour changes when you move on to joining one bit of wood onto a different bit of timber, even if it's the same species, as you can see there. Doesn't cause much problems when you go to join, but you definitely get a distinct discontinuity. And as for the masking effect, yeah, it worked pretty well. It took a fair bit of anal retentiveness, more or less, to get it to work, but work it did, I reckon. I mean, it doesn't have to spin at 3000 RPM and fly through the air at 100 mile an hour, so you know, it's not propeller carving. It's just decorative woodwork. And it's not too bad at that. For a beginner, which one actually is. So anyway, while I was playing around with this wood carving, wood staining, oiling idea, a possum knocked down from its high perch a toy I'd made for my daughter in 1996. And I really sort of had to fix it, and that meant that I really sort of had to fix my son's version of the same toy, because it had also been broken for years and years and years and lying around. I'd been gonna fix it and gonna fix it and gonna fix it. So it became a perfect occasion for me to first repair the broken bits and then sand them back and oil them after re-blacking the quote metalwork unquote on a pair of hand-carved Banksia wooden toy guns. The rifle, which I made for my son when he wanted a toy gun when he was 7 years old, it had a broken barrel that had been held together with sticky tape for years. But this is more of a silhouette of a toy gun than an actual wooden carved toy gun, in that it looks really good from the side, but to be honest, it's not even half an inch thick, and it's got a bit of a warp in it because it's best approximation quarter cut milled chainsaw salvage timber from wind fallen tree. And in 1996 my son was 7 years old, and yeah, he wanted a toy gun, so Daddy made him a toy gun, and this was the one. And then all of a sudden his sister wanted a gun as well, and the problem was this was the only thin bit of Banksia left, because I'd made a couple of desks for him and I was kind of running out, and I really only had one bit of Banksia left, but it was a bit thicker than this and it was very old and not as strong. And I asked if it was going to be okay if Elizabeth's gun was going to be a shotgun rather than a rifle. As you see, it does have sights, and if you've got a small enough head you can get a cheek weld on it. It has got perilously close to being what people in the game would call a straight pull, but that was because that was all I could fit on the board. Anyway, That's what Banksia looks like. An old bit of Banksia, and yeah, it's now been inscribed. And that sounds like my daughter texting me to tell me that she's happy about the cat treatment. So yeah, that's Banksia, and that is also Banksia. But because the bit of wood was wider, I was able to carve a lot more three-dimensional of a shape into it. Meant the trigger guard was a bit thick, and the trigger likewise, particularly as it was just such old, knotty looking wood. But as they say on the tin of stain, all it can do is enhance the grain that's already there, and this is actual natural red wood. Once again, you have to have a 6 or 7 year old sized head to be able to get yourself a cheek weld and line the sights up. But yeah, little kids can have an enormous amount of fun running around, role modelling on the bushranger stories that they've been read to by Hurricane Light, because they live on an endangered species sanctuary where Daddy lives on kerosene lamps and candles. So that is real, genuine, fair income red grainy wood. I didn't bother getting cedar stain and putting that on pine because I've got actual cedar. I haven't got any actual walnut, so I can't show you a piece of actual walnut, but I sure can show you black Sharpie texture stained and Danish oiled Banksia, which looks pretty good. Particularly when you put it up against a piece of stained radiata pine. Radiata pine on its own actually has a bit of decoration to its grain, looked at from the right angle. But yeah, you look at that and all of a sudden you can see why timber like Banksia and Tuna australis, Australian red cedar, is pretty much commercially extinct because everybody bloody loved it. Although the killer application for Banksia in colonial Australia was Chinese labourers used it for making their shoulder yokes, because this wood was light, but it was so deeply, densely interwoven in the grain, looking almost like lung tissue. But yeah, it was very difficult to get it to split when it was, like cut down and milled and properly dried. So yeah, that's what the Chinese miners used to make their yokes for carrying buckets of ore backwards and forwards. Or so I was told. So there you go. Walnut stained radiata pine, masked and sealed with Danish oil up against genuine Banksia. And for the record, there was one break along here. That's a pretty old one. There was one break around here. That was an even older break. I think both of those occurred when the toy was still being played with by an actual child, whereas this one around here, that was caused by the possum week before last knocking it down. And yeah, I don't know, I suppose it's a bit of a ridiculous thing to think of, but it did occur to me that as my daughter was preparing to go and visit the Euro peons during their native fighting season. She's in Germany, and Mr. Putin has apparently moved his nuclear tactical weapons into Belarus. Because, what did he say? Oh yeah, pretty soon it's going to get to the point where Ukraine is totally dependent on foreign weapons suppliers, and you can't ever win a war like that. It might be a Putin-esque way of saying I am now in a position to nuke your supply lines back to their NATO country origins. So yeah, it's only a week till my daughter flies out of Germany. But yeah, before she went to visit the Euro peons, Daddy refurbished the only gun that she ever had. Not that she could take it with her, because I'm pretty sure this might class as a replica firearm these days. I don't know, I hope not. It doesn't look like any particular firearm that anybody ever built, and there's only 3 bits of metal on either one of them, the 3 nails, which constitute the sights. But anyway, poor man's way to pretend they can afford real proper timber for woodworking and joinery. Stain, being rather put to shame by real grain. Warbles on to YouTube. It's not a cat video, is it? Ciao.